Hello. Thanks for coming. So this is mostly modular. My name is Kelly, and I come here every Sunday night, and we talk about modular knitting, primarily number knitting. This book was published in 1952 by Virginia Woods Bellamy. That's Virginia. She got a patent for this modular knitting method back in 1948 and put together a whole correspondence course where she taught modular knitting to knitters around the world. Then she published her correspondence course as a book. And hey, Helen. And it only had one edition. And then it went into obscurity for decades. And it's ridiculously hard to find. I found one on Amazon recently for $6,000. I love the book, but I don't know if I quite want to pay $6,000 for it. Hey, Michelle, Mishi B. Hello, thanks for coming. Yeah, so I'm working to republish it. If you're new here, this will be new. If you've been here before, you might have heard some of this again. That's okay. So I went through and hey, Karen, I went through and I scanned the whole book. It's 274 pages. And I redrew all the charts, which took ages, because some of the charts are pretty complicated. And I honestly think these charts are why no other publisher, excuse me, no other publisher has ever decided to reprint this, because these things were a pain in the behind. Excuse me. Hey, bub. Anyway, if you have a copy of the book, then you'll be familiar with the old awful charts. Ingenious, but very difficult to follow. Are knit along from now until the end of February 2023. If you're watching this in the future, we're doing the tropical leaf car throw. This is an example of one of the new charts that I made. It's on graph paper and I drew all the lines. It's a heck of a lot easier to follow. Yes, I'm okay. Maybe I got something in my throat. I'm not sure. I'm okay. If you downloaded this chart, I put a Dropbox link down. I think it's down below. If not, it's in the videos from the last couple of weeks, the little Dropbox link. That link is good until January 31st. And today is the 29th. So it's good for 2 more days. And then that link will be no mas. And that has the original pattern from the book. And it's got the picture that I colorized, and it's got the brand spanking new chart. And it's like, this was my colored version for like the colors that I'm doing for my blanket. But when you print yours out, it'll be black and white. And so you can color it on your own, however you like, to get an idea of what colors you're going to be using. I wanted to show you, I made some pretty good progress on this week. And of course, I'm kind of in the middle of a row, so it's a little hard to see. But I've got the purple, and then gosh, that's a tangled mess. That's a little embarrassing. And then I've got the next gray part. I'm almost done with the gray, and then I'm gonna move on to the pink section right here. So I feel like I should explain the reason this is a awful tangled mess is because I don't like breaking the yarn. And I'm at the point in the blanket where I'm doing here, right? And so I've got a little bit of purple and then all this gray and a little bit of purple on this side. And what I'm doing is I'm using both the inside and the outside of this ball of yarn, and it gets ridiculously tangled. And it's kind of stupid because it's all because I don't want to break the yarn. And I don't know. Yeah, so that's why that's a mess. On that note, have you ever heard of a method of knitting? I think it's called twining. I think it's like a Scandinavian method that was they used it in mittens. Have you ever heard of that? I don't remember exactly where I heard about it. It might have been in one of my historical knitting books, but I think the idea is that, Helen, you've heard of it. You work the project from both the inside and the outside of the ball of yarn. And you might even like double strand the yarn. And after every stitch, you twist it and then another stitch and twist it. And I don't know. I haven't tried it. I think maybe it gives like a denser fabric. I think it would be interesting to try. But just like this, it sounds super tangly. I think that would be the kind of thing I'd want to do alone by myself and not want anyone to talk to me during the process, because it sounds like it might make me on edge a little bit, and it might come across as like kind of if anyone interrupted me. Anyway, so I've been marking my dates. So this is week 1, this is week 2, week 3. And I think, we got until the end of February. I probably will get up to here next week and then the week after, and then just work the borders. We had talked last week about how if your blanket isn't big enough, you could simply like make these borders bigger. Instead of like 8 ridges, you can make them, 12 or 16 or however big that you want these side strips to be. You can just add more. Have any of you cast on or made any good progress on your tropical leaf car throw? I did see that we had a whopping 1 person in the Ravelry group actually like added to her projects, which is great. It wasn't me. I haven't done it yet, but someone named Cardinal Knits, I think she actually added it to her Ravelry projects. So that's exciting. Still working on reviving that old Ravelry group for number knitting. I started it in 2015, and it's kind of been in hibernation. Bub says, I think you use it in Latvian braids. I'm gonna have to try that because I'm not entirely sure I know what a Latvian braid is. I know what Latvian mittens are, and I know what braids are, but I don't know what a Latvian braid is. I will research that. Karen has 18 ridges on the first section of the blanket. Well, it's pretty good because it's yeah. So Karen is like right about there. Now, Karen, are you doing your side triangles at the same time? Or are you opting to fill them in later as per the original pattern? Oh, fill in later. I had another lady that did the same thing. DJ is gonna also fill them in later. Bob says, how much yarn do you need? Okay, the original, I'll get to your question in just a sec, Karen. The original pattern, I think it calls for, do I have a copy of it here? It's like, it says worsted weight Afghan 1 pound. And that's if you're using size 11 needles and you get 3 stitches to 1 inch, which is decidedly looser than most people knit. But you can. That would make a size 47 inch blanket if you do it that way. But what you can do is if you don't want it to be 47 inches, you want it smaller, you can simply change your box number from 4 to like, 3.5 or 3, and that'll just proportionally shrink this down. So instead of casting on, I think it was 96 plus 96, you would cast on fewer. You would do fewer stitches. You could just change your box number, and that will adjust your size, your blanket down accordingly. Karen's question. What's your question, Karen? I don't understand about not binding off and starting the second section in farther. What do you mean to not bind off and continue to section 2? Okay, so in the original pattern, it says Unit 1, dark green. You're going to knit a double wing on 96 by 96 stitches, and then cast off on the 32nd ridge. And so what she's having you do is, here's the nice photograph from the book. She's having you knit all of this section, this green section, bind it off, and then pick up all those same stitches that you just bound off in another color. And you're welcome to do that. If you like the idea of binding off all the stitches and then picking them up again in the next color, go for it. For me, what I'm doing, like, I think it's a little pointless for a blanket to bind off all the stitches and then pick them all up again. So I'm just continuing on knitting those stitches. Oh, Karen says, I think the colors of the blanket are throwing me off. Okay, I think I just realized why she says to bind off. I'm pretty sure I think I just figured it out. That only took me 8 years. So she's having you make this double wing here, and then she's having you bind off, and so you don't have any loose stitches at all. And then she has you cast or pick up for this guy. And so what is this? This is 1, 2, and then where's 3? Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. So she's having you fill in these two outer triangles, and then go back and fill in these 2 outer triangles. And I think so if you are doing it the way that she says, and you're not working these triangles over here concurrently, you're not working, these 3 together, then follow her instructions. What I opted to do, and I didn't think about the consequences until just now. That was a good point, Karen. What I opted to do was bind off or cast on a bunch of stitches in pink, cast on a bunch of stitches in purple, and then cast on a bunch more stitches in pink, and then just work all of this at one time using intarsia right here where the two yarns lock over the top. And in that case, I don't need to bind off because I've just got all my stitches, and I'm just going to keep working this whole thing using intarsia. But if you are not doing it that way and you're following her instructions, like I probably should have done, no, I got to do it my own way. If you're following her instructions, you will bind off on the second row of the 32nd ridge. And so all these stitches will be tidy. And then you can pick up, because you need them to, you need the stitches to be bind off unless you want to like put them on a holder, but that could be kind of a pain. So you're going to bind off, and then with your gray, just like the original pattern says, you're going to pick up all those stitches and work this unit, and then go back and start to knit first unit 3 over here, because you'll pick up all these stitches from unit 3, and then you'll go back over here and pick up all these stitches from unit 4, and you'll work those next. Does that help? Sometimes Bellamy's methods confuse me because I don't do it the way she says. Like, I think I know better, and I'm usually wrong. Anyway, so that all makes more sense now. Oh, and here's the handy dandy new chart that you can print out and color. Isn't that better than the one in the book? The one in the book are hard to read, but mine are nice. They're tidy. Helen says she's completed 22 ridges and have restarted 2 times so far. I hear you. It's some projects are like that. It's a challenge. Like, you think, how hard can it be? It's garter stitch. Like, increasing the edges, decreasing the center, right? Like, easy peasy. Not necessarily. So, along the vein of learning hard learned lessons, I was working on my Tarzetto hat, which I've showed to you the last 4 weeks. So this was, ironically, this little one, this first one, where I didn't know what the heck I was doing. This is the best one so far. And then I kept trying to tweak it and make it better. And like with each tweak that I make, I keep coming up with like less than satisfactory results. And so here's number 2, which is, you know, it's super warm. It is super warm. And I learned something new this week. I think this shape is a little bit odd, but there's actually a style. There's a style called a high top beanie, and it's made to like stick out at the top like that. And that's what it's supposed to be. So I'm just going to go with that idea. Like, this is a high top beanie, and it's supposed to have this funky shape. And I've even seen some that do just this. They go in and then they have like this poof thing at the top. I think that's what happens if you were to take just like 2, make your beanie just kind of in a 2 of these shapes, and then sew them together and then put it on a human head. I think what it ends up looking like is that, like, more like a loaf of bread, just because of the shape of the head involved. So I'm not going to beat myself up about this too much. I think it's still a success. And then I did number 3, and because the number 1 was like so small, it was like toddler sized, I kept thinking, I need to adjust my gauge and make it bigger. And then I did this one, which is even bigger than the green one. Huge. I feel like a Smurf. Remember the Smurfs from the 80s? There you go. Maybe if it was all white, it would be a Smurf hat, but it's striped. So anyway, kind of slouchy. Maybe it's a baker's hat. I'm not sure. So this was attempt number 3, and I thought I was like I was getting on the right track. And then attempt number 4 happened. Karen says to flatten that top part like a tam. Maybe that's what I could do. I could like put it around a dish plate and block it. Maybe that would work. I'll try that next week and see what happens. Oh dear, this one. I'm embarrassed, and I didn't figure it out until like 5 o'clock today when I was sewing it together, and it didn't it didn't fit. So I got all my parts and pieces. Um, like I knitted it all up. I almost finished seaming it. I got the tubular. I did the 2x2 ribbing and the tubular bind off, which is lovely. And then I flipped it over. And I was like, wait a second. Like, there's this. The angles don't match up, and it's totally wrong. It's totally wrong. And so what happened is that I screwed up on Tuesday, and I didn't catch it until today. All right. So let me show you what I did. This is what I was trying to make. And so you do your center triangle, and then you do this part up here, and then you flip it and you do this green and white part, and then you flip it and you do the purple part, and then you add ribbing. That's in theory how it's supposed to work. But what happened on Tuesday, I screwed up. And instead of this whole section here, that's what I made. So I'm missing like this big chunk. And so when I went to seam it together, it has like these weird holes in it, which is exactly what I ended up making. Like, yeah, big hole right there. So I'm not exactly sure what I'll do. Maybe I'll just I'll fill it in with random garter stitch short rows and leave that part in the back and call it good. Give it away to someone. I don't know. But I thought I'd try it on just for fun. And it was an interesting result. I also usually do my ribbing on needles 2 sizes smaller. And for some reason, I didn't have 2 sizes smaller. Like, I thought I had my whole number. I thought I had all my knitting needles. Like, I had all the sizes. And apparently I'm missing a size 2, or it's missing in action. I can't find it. And so what was interesting about this is I put this on, and granted, these two, oh, balaclava, that's a good idea. I'll flip it around in just a second. I'll try that. So I've got these 2 parts that aren't seamed yet that will be seamed at some point. And I thought, you know what this kind of reminds me of is like if you've ever worn a little bandana and it's like pointed out at the side. And I don't know how warm it would be. I mean, I guess it's like a vented hat. But it's kind of nice because it's got ribbing here, and so it holds nice and tight. And it's got kind of the same aesthetic as a bandana. Like here's a bandana, and oh, that didn't work. A lot of times I have a hard time with bandanas because my hair is very, very, very fine, and it doesn't have enough like body to hold certain hair ties on very well. It's just too fine. But I like bandanas because they cover up all the craziness of my hair, all the frizziness. There we go. And they've also got like these little things here at the side, which that's a little too tight. But anyway, so this hat, which is kind of a failure. I guess it wasn't a failure. It was a lesson learned. It's kind of got the same aesthetic as a bandana. So I might do something with that. Ah, yes. Stay tuned for next week. So I had another idea for garter stitch because everything in Bellamy's book is regular garter stitch. It's got the ridges. But I mentioned before that my friend Jackie, she downsized and sold me all of her knitting books for $100. And honestly, a lot of them were like from I don't know, maybe she worked in a library, but she got a bunch of them from libraries, which is great because she told me, Kelly, I want you to have them because I don't want them just sitting in a library somewhere, which makes me think that most of the knitting books in libraries never get checked out. Like is if you don't have it on hand, you can't really reference it. And so most knitting books in libraries just sit there. So she sold me all of her knitting books. And this one is called Great Garter Stitch. And it's got a lot of the same ideas as, the other geometric garter stitch knitting books, in that they're they're based on 45 and 90-degree angles, which I think is pretty common in garter stitch. But what is so interesting about this one, it doesn't strictly use 45 and 90-degree angles like this. They're more rectangular sometimes, and so the increases and decreases aren't precisely every other row on some of these to get certain shapes, which I think is really interesting because most of the garter stitch books I have everything is based on 45 and 90-degree angles. But another reason this one is so neat is because, let's see, in the back, I'm sure most of you have stitch dictionaries. In the back, there's a whole stitch dictionary just on garter stitches. And I always thought garter stitch was like like there was just garter stitch, like with the ridges, like plain garter stitch. So the idea of garter stitches is really interesting to me. And probably a lot of the stitches in here, you could probably also find them in like the Barbara Walker books and other stitch dictionaries, but they've probably compiled them in here. And so you've got like the bee stitch, and you've got bricks, and you've got mock stockinette and tweed. You have a whole, I think there's 20 pages or so of garter stitch lace and garter stitch bubbles, and just, it's really interesting. And I think it would be fun to try some of the module shapes that Bellamy developed, but to do them in these other garter stitches to like see how the shape changed or would change. And I know that some knitting books, they do that. Like here's one. This one is called Module Magic. And like these triangles, for example, you can see that it's like you work like 3 rows of knit and 1 row of purl, and that'll give you that effect where the garter stitch ridge bump appears in one color and the stockinette background is in the other color. And so I just think it would be interesting to try some of these other garter stitch methods with the number knitting shapes. Yeah. I think it would be, if you've ever knit entrelac, how it's generally it's all knit. So you got all these, you know, knitted pieces like this, and then you go on the next row and you've got them all like this. And the interesting effect with that is like a basket weave, but because it's all stuck in it instead of garter stitch, then it all the strips, they kind of like pop out, and it looks, even though it's all essentially stuck in it, because they're all at opposing angles and the opposing tension, it makes it really pop, which is interesting. So I'm going to do some exploring with knitting these different shapes, but doing them in other garter stitches besides just regular garter stitches. Karen says those different stitches are interesting and pretty and open up a lot of possibilities. And I agree. And because all the modern, like in the last 20 years, all the garter stitch books that I've got, and I'm pretty sure I have all of the ones that were published from probably pretty much any time. But anyway, so the modern garter stitch books like Domino Knitting, and you know, then we've got the Modular Magic, and then again we've got Great Garter Stitch. They're all very multi-toned, right? So they use generally, like, they used a lot of stripes, and there's not a lot of designs in them that are like solid colors. I think Vivian Hawksborough, and forgive me, Vivian, if I am botching your name, because I don't know how to pronounce your last name. There's a little bit in here with like single colors with just like pops of other colors. But as far as modular garter stitch designs that are worked exclusively in a single color of yarn, a single type of yarn, I can't think of any other than what Bellamy has done with her sweaters. Yeah. For some reason, the and maybe because it's just interesting, the module shapes, people really like to go crazy with the colors, which is fine if that's your aesthetic. That's fine. But for those of us who like more maybe toned down type of sweaters, maybe not so varying in color. I mean, I know these are kids sweaters, but like if you want something a little bit more subtle, I like Bellamy's designs better for that reason. Anyway, I thought, since we're talking about single color garter stitch, I've showed this, I think I showed this off once before. This is the diamond design sweater for men. I don't know what differentiates it for men versus women, but it's a one piece. She has a couple other diamond design sweaters for women that are, no, this isn't one of them. But it's the same idea that the units, you know, they're knit on a diamond shape, and the ridges the diagonal lines all run vertically. But this one is interesting because it starts off in the corner, and then you work all of your diamonds like so, and then up and over the shoulders. And so it's like it's a corner to corner from one front hip to the other back hip. And it's just got some really interesting like shoulder units, and the arms are pretty wild, and it's got amazing gussets, and it is a fun knit. I think I made the turtleneck a little too long. I wore this out once and someone's like, wow, but that turtleneck is really from the 80s. I had it on. I was going to wear it for this episode, but I had it on for like 5 minutes and I started overheating. So I had to take it off because it was too hot. But so this is a single color mitered square sweater. Oh, Karen, you're going to pull yours out of hibernation? Yes, please do. I can't wait to see it. That was a fun knit. I don't often buy more than one skein in one color, which I admittedly makes it difficult to make anything other than scarves. But there was a yarn shop that I visited once that was going out of business, and they were doing a massive sale. And I asked her, I was making, I think, a lot of Christmas stockings at the time, and I asked her what yarn she had that she was having a hard time getting rid of, and she pulled out all of this 100% acrylic, this red yarn, and she's like, "I'm having a hard time getting getting rid of this yarn." So I bought it all, and that's the only reason I had 6 skeins of the same color, um, is because I was knitting Christmas stockings, and then I went on a road trip, and I had it all, and I decided to make a sweater, so and it's super warm. I think I knit that's worsted weight yarn. I think I knit that on at least size 10s, maybe 11s, and it's so hot I can hardly ever wear it. It's amazing. So, next up, I like to show you guys I have a pretty eclectic knitting library. So I thought I'd show you guys this fun one. This is also from my friend Jackie. It's a hat. It's a leaflet. How much was it? 35 cents. Yeah. But then they had to raise their prices because it says all patterns now 50 cents. So at some point they did have to do a price increase. And what's interesting is this is from the same year that Number Knitting was published. So this is from 1952. And this is by Della Fitch, the Knitograph Pattern Company in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And it's got these cute little boys and girls hats. One of them's got a pistol. I probably wouldn't fly today, but there's little dogs, ducks, bunny, super cute. I like the little helmet, the brim. That's a nice idea. I have a running hat. Well, I make it a running hat. I have a beanie with a brim on it, and I find it great for running in the rain. All right, so let's open this up. The reason I'm showing you this is because I've been thinking about the whole idea of graph paper and gauge. So this is the chart. I think these are cats. Maybe that's a cat. And each rectangle on there represents a stitch. And what's so interesting about this is knit at a 1-to-1 scale. So normally if you have except for a mitten pattern, but like for a lot of colorwork chart patterns, it's just going to give you like the little repeat of the chart in a box, and you're supposed to repeat it, however many times. They don't like print out the whole thing for you. Like if you have, 200 stitches, they're not going to print you a sheet that's got 200 stitches. But with this, they did. So they printed each hat with the right number of stitches, and, it's all colored, and but it's to size. So these are actually the size of the bonnets. Let's see if I can, oh, there it is. This is what's interesting to me, because I know I've mentioned in the past that Bellamy, she doesn't have anywhere in her book about washing. I mean, like wash it in cold water, but like she doesn't have anything in there about blocking. There's no regard to blocking, because she says it's just going to stretch to fit. Just, cool it away from the radiator, pan wash gentle, it'll fit. No discussion on blocking whatsoever. And so this is from the same era, and it says, lay work on graph occasionally to check for size. So like as you're knitting it, you're supposed to see if it fits on the bonnet printout. But right below that, it says, since no two people knit exactly alike, it is necessary to test your knitting and yarn by making a sample before starting the garment. There may be a difference of as much as 4 sizes in the finished work with the wrong yarn and needles. Methods for testing gauge is given at the beginning of printed instructions for each pattern, but you're supposed to lay your bonnet on here to see if it fits. Oh, and then after that, it even discusses blocking. So I don't know how you're supposed to like match up your in process piece to this. So there's a little bit of disconnect here, but I think it's interesting that you're supposed to match your actual knitted piece onto a printed piece. And incidentally, there's a whole Etsy shop. I looked it up, Knitograph. There's a whole Etsy shop that specializes in these leaflets. And so they've got tons of them for bonnets and sweaters and all kinds of stuff. They're all from the 50s, and apparently she collects them and sells them. Yeah, so I just thought that was interesting to share with you. So, along the idea, since we're sort of talking about graph paper, I thought I'd show a couple of other examples of graph paper use in knitting books, because a lot of knitting books do not specifically discuss graph paper. Let me see if I can find it in the Mary Thomas book. And for those of you who don't know, Mary Thomas one was, I think it was in the early 40s, sometime in the 40s. She was a big influence upon Bellamy, and Bellamy referenced her several times in her knitting book. Here it is. So back in the day, this was a pretty common method of making knitting patterns. If you look at any old vintage knitting books, they were laid out like dressmaking patterns. And a lot of times they were even like probably designed by dressmakers. And then, someone just calculated out like the stitch count to get these particular angles, and then just wrote up the knitting instructions for it. And so it wasn't exactly the way that we use graph paper in number knitting, because number knitting is based on the 90 and the 45 degree angles. But the idea of graph paper was used differently, but it was, relatively common during the era. But what's interesting about Mary Thomas was, so she's got the graph paper here, and then you flip forward just a few pages, and all of a sudden you've got garter stitch. And I can't help but wonder if when Virginia was writing her book, and this was her influence, if in her mind, like she had pulled ideas, like they just kind of morphed together as she was working on her book, and they kind of merged. And even like a few pages later, you can see how the graph paper is making different shapes like chevrons and necklines and things, and they all kind of congealed in her mind. So let's also show off one more graph paper. And this one is interesting because this is Module Magic again. She doesn't call this graph paper. She calls this grid paper. And this is by Ginger Looters. And she's got a couple of different kinds. She's got the 45 and 90 degree angles. But then she's also got equilateral triangles, which that's not my goal to learn this year, learn the math for that. I know the math pretty well for all the, the 45 and 90 degree angles, but I haven't really done any time with the equilateral triangles. And I think that would be something really fun to go and explore more in depth. And maybe we'll add it to our library of shapes. 2023. Oh, so I think I talked last week a bit about the advanced section of the book, because it starts on page because the whole number knitting book is to empower you as a knitter to be able to design your own projects. And it was based on a correspondence course. And so, there's number knitting and flat design, which is like stoles and, pot holders and, table placemats and that sort of thing. And then there's kids design, and then there's adult designs. But then in the back, there's a section called To the Adventuresome Knitter. And it goes on for like 20 pages. And it's a lot of personal stories. It's a lot of theory. And she gives you exercises to try in coloring the different shapes in different ways to see how the design plays with the eyes. And then page 252, it talks about knitting in reverse. And you might think, or knitting the shapes in reverse. Here it is. You might think about like knitting backwards, and it's not the same. So if we take a divided triangle, for example, we're going to cast on this long edge. So cast on these bottom two edges and then work back and forth. And you're going to do a decrease at the outside edges, a single decrease on the outside edges, and then a double decrease on the inside diagonal line every other row. And so you start big and then you work small, right? Which is great if you've got plenty of yarn and you know how much yarn that you've got to work with. But if you want to use all your yarn and you don't know how big your triangle can be, you can knit it in reverse. And what I mean by that is, instead of casting on the long edge, you cast on up here and you work it backwards. So you do a double increase here and then a single decrease here every other row. And so then when you run out of yarn, you can just bind off. And that way you can maximize your yarn usage. But what's interesting is throughout the whole book, and I've wondered about that, is that Bellamy never talks about that. She only gives you how to knit the square from the bind on edges up. But this week I discovered how she described how to knit the other way. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Reverse. I have my number knitting book pulled up here, and I'm doing a keyword search for that word. And it says the cast off units have two flat edges, cast on and cast off. These units may be knitted backwards and still follow the same direction, with the exception of the double wing unit. To be knitted backwards, merely reverse the order of the increase and decrease, decreasing along the edge of the wings and increasing twice every other row in the center. And I thought it was interesting that only at the very, very, very end of the book, in like paragraphs and paragraphs of text and stories of her Aunt Molly, does she throw that in. It's not in the techniques section in the front. It's not in how to knit the shapes in the front. It's buried. And I always thought she just skipped it, but no, she didn't. I just didn't read that far. So in the back of the book, To the Adventuresome Knitter, there's instructions for how to knit these from the other direction. Yes. Did any of you have any questions for me, or should I just keep chatting? Because I have a few more things that I wanted to share. Oh, Valentine's Day is coming up. And I don't generally mention it here on my YouTube channel, because this is about techniques and knitting history and stuff, but I do knitting swag. And I have these cute little tumblers and mugs. I made illustrations, like knitted illustrations, out of Fair Isle charts, and I get them printed on mugs, and I can even put your name on them. This is from Sean. I'm Kelly, but this says Sean on it. Anyway, happy Valentine's Day. But we'll see each other before then. So while I was reading this to the adventuresome knitter section, it struck me because Bellamy was she's very conversational, very personal, she spoke a lot in To You, the Knitter, and it's decidedly different tone than, the other knitting books of the day, like the Big Book of Knitting and, other popular 1940s, 50s era books, which weren't by a singular author. This one was. And the way that she wrote it, it's like, especially this last section, she's writing like a friend, like she's sitting there, you're in a room together knitting, and she's just telling you, what you can do and how you should do it. And just, it's very conversational. And it reminded me very much of Elizabeth Zimmerman's style. If you've ever read, I don't have all of her books, but I was flipping through the Opinionated Knitter and the Knitter's Almanac. And those were, they're very conversational. Just like you're having a chat with a friend and it happens to be about yarn. And oh, by the way, here's, some recipes and stories of us at the lake and family outings, and my friend shore these sheep and made me some yarn. It's very, very fluid. And I thought that was interesting that Bellamy's writing reminded me so much of Elizabeth Zimmerman's writing later on. Now, do any of you know what was the earliest book that Elizabeth published? I know she did a lot in the 70s, and I know she did patterns in magazines and that sort of thing in the 60s, maybe even the 50s, but I don't know like what her earliest published book was. So I would be very curious about that. If any of you happen to know, I suppose I could look it up somewhere, but if any of you know offhand, that would be interesting. So another thing, along there's a road in which Elizabeth Zimmerman and Virginia Woods Bellamy sort of merge. And I'll put a link to this down in the description probably tomorrow, but there was a woman a few years ago. Her name is Lily Marsh, Dr. Lily Marsh. She actually wrote she did a doctoral, I guess, a dissertation. Her PhD is, I think it's in textiles and handcrafts. I'm not exactly sure, but her PhD was all about Elizabeth Zimmerman and her influence on American crafts and kind of this merging of the artistic with the crafting in American society. Because before that, fiber people weren't really considered artisans or craftsmen. The whole craftsman idea was like woodworkers, and that was real art. But like knitting was kind of considered, like homebody type of stuff. And so Elizabeth really pushed the envelope on that and got into some artistic guilds. And so Lily, she spent, I think, a couple of months or maybe even a couple of summers. I'm not entirely sure of the timeline, but she spent quite a bit of time in the archives of Schoolhouse Press. And she did all kinds of research on Elizabeth's timeline. And it's a fabulous read. And I highly encourage you to check it out. It was from Purdue. So I'm going to put that link down below. And I'll also link to, Lily had done a couple of different, it might have been 8s. I think it was a multi-part podcast series that she did with a podcaster. Her podcast name is called Yarns at Yinhu. And it was a multi-part series. They did all about Elizabeth Zimmerman and her work in the fiber arts and the artistic community. And what was really interesting to me, this is how I found out about it, because one of my knitting friends, she emailed me episode 1 and said, "Hey, Kelly, I think you should take a look at this." Episode 1 of the Elizabeth Zimmerman story, it starts off discussing number knitting. And, that just blew my mind. So because, you know, number knitting influenced Elizabeth, and then she went through this whole garter stitch phase for a long time, and it was interesting how those two were in the early years were very tightly tied together. So I will link to those, to Dr. Lily Marsh's dissertation, as well as the Yarns at Yinhu episodes, and you're gonna love them. They're so great. All right, so next week, I don't know if I'm going to be able to knit another one of these next week because I keep screwing this up so badly. I'm going to try. I'm going to try to knit another one, and maybe I'll get it right this time. But I do want to show you all my calculator, what I'm trying to do with this. You can tell me if I'm nuts or not. Okay, so I have an Excel spreadsheet, and what this is going to let you do, it's going to let you plug in your head circumference, and then plug in how much negative ease that you want. And the negative ease would generally be determined by like your yarn weight. So a bulkier yarn would require less negative ease than a thin yarn. This is the idea. I don't know if it's working. And then it would automatically calculate your box number. And using this, not butchered, as your guideline, it would tell you how many stitches to cast on for your center triangle, how many, you know, ridges to knit, and give you all kinds of great information to be able to, with your own yarn and your own head size and, you know, negative ease, determine your stitch count without you having to calculate anything. That's the idea. So you know what I'm working toward. I'm trying. And of course, attempt number 1 is still my favorite. If I was a toddler, it would fit awesome, but it doesn't fit quite as awesome as I would like. So I'm going to keep plugging away on that. And next week we'll also keep working on the tropical leaf car throw. And if you want to, I this week I will add mine as a project in Ravelry, and because I started a little Ravelry thread for it, so I'm gonna I'll add that and put it on my list of things to do, because we have one lonely person in the knit along on Ravelry. And if you don't use Ravelry, that's fine. Well, you could use the same hashtag on Instagram, and we will make it work. One thing I forgot to mention is that I decided we're going to have prizes, and the chances of you winning a prize for this knit along are pretty high because there's not very many of us yet. But I haven't decided exactly all that they're going to be, but I want to start out with these little guys. I had showed you this last week. I think it had a different cover, but I found a photo. Oh, you just ordered your yarn. That's awesome. I found a photo enhancer app, and they had a 3-day free trial. And so I went through the entire number knitting book, and I uploaded like 70 photos from the number knitting book, and it enhanced them and sharpened them and colorized them. And so it made them come alive. Like, I think this is the one from the original book, but now she's got peachy skin and red lips, and yeah. And so we decided to call this a pocket reference guide. And so it's got the rules of number knitting, and some of them are two-sided, the symbols and abbreviations, and then like how to cast on and how to knit all the different shapes. And so if you don't have the book, which I'm guessing is most of you, because they're hard to find, except in I have the ebook for sale on my website. But like, if you don't have that, this little guy is a handy reference. And what's nice about this is that you can just like throw this in a project bag or your purse or wherever, and just like keep it handy. And it's laminated, so it's nice and strong. And if we ever do add more shapes, like instructions on how to knit in reverse, we can add those here. This little clip just opens up, and we can add more cards to it. So anyway, I think this will be one of the prizes for the this first knit along. Oh, it's gonna be fun. I do wonder though, because I've never been part of an knit-along or like the whole prize giving process. I think the way it works is for all the people that participate in the thread, there's like a random number generator, and it'll just, give me a random number between, 1 and 50 or whatever, and it'll choose a number for you, and then you just like go down that far on the list and, that's the person who wins. Pretty sure that's the way it works. If you know of a different way that I should know about, do tell, because that's probably what we're gonna do. Yeah, so it's 7 o'clock. I think that's it for now. I am gonna be in a different location next week. Um, so it's probably not gonna be as nicely lit, but I'm going skiing, and so I'm gonna be somewhere else. So that'll be fun. Well, thanks all for coming. I'm really glad that you were here. And thanks, Karen. Thanks for joining me. And hopefully I'll see you next week. All right. Bye.